All right, everyone, get comfy and settle in because tonight we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's generating a ton of buzz: cannabis and sleep. Now, some people swear by it. They say it's like a miracle cure for insomnia, but then you've got others who claim it totally throws their sleep out of whack. You've all said it's a mountain of research articles and personal stories about your experiences with cannabis and sleep. So we're going to break it all down, separate fact from fiction, and hopefully answer some of your burning questions along the way.
What really strikes me is just how much anecdotal evidence we're seeing out there. It's clear that cannabis is impacting people's sleep in some way, but the how and why, well, those are a lot more complicated than just cannabis makes you sleepy.
Exactly. And that's why we're not stopping at anecdotes. We're diving deep into the science, looking at how cannabis interacts with our bodies, especially those systems that control our sleep-wake cycles. You ready to unlock the secrets of a good night's rest?
Let's crack this code. And to do that, we first need to understand that sleep is actually a pretty finely tuned process. It's orchestrated by our circadian rhythm, which you can think of as our internal body clock.
Right, like a 24-hour timer telling us when it's time to hit the hay and when it's time to rise and shine. But what's actually running this clock? What makes it tick?
Well, there's this tiny little region in our brains called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN for short, and it acts as the master timekeeper. Think of it as the conductor of an orchestra, making sure all the instruments are playing in sync. And in this case, the orchestra includes our hormones, light exposure, even our body temperature, all working together to create a smooth sleep-wake cycle. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because a 2023 study by Bizarri and others published in Pharmaceuticals suggests that the endocannabinoid system, the ECS, might actually play a role in how the SCN keeps time.
Hold on, the endocannabinoid system. That's the system that reacts to cannabis, right? I thought that was totally separate from our natural sleep-wake cycle.
See, that's a common misconception. The ECS isn't just about reacting to external cannabinoids like THC or CBD. It's an intricate network within our bodies that helps regulate a whole bunch of functions, including mood, appetite, pain, and you guessed it, sleep.
Whoa, wait a minute. So we have a whole system dedicated to cannabinoids. Are you telling me our bodies are like walking cannabis factories?
Not quite factories, but our bodies do produce their own cannabinoids, and these are called endocannabinoids. One of these, anandamide, is like your body's natural chill pill. And get this, its levels fluctuate throughout the day, possibly contributing to those feelings of sleepiness as the evening rolls in.
Okay, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Our bodies are already messing with cannabinoids on their own. So when we consume cannabis, we're essentially adding to this system that's already in place.
Precisely. And depending on what we add, THC or CBD, for example, the effects on sleep can be pretty different.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. Now, I know THC is the psychoactive component of cannabis, the one that gets you high. But how does it actually affect sleep?
Well, THC is known for inducing drowsiness, especially in higher doses. But, interestingly enough, a 2024 study by Salisi and others found that even a moderate dose of 10 milligrams of oral THC made people who rarely use cannabis drowsy without messing with their cognitive abilities the next day.
Wait, so you're saying a dose of THC can knock you out without leaving you feeling groggy in the morning? That seems to go against everything I've heard about weed hangovers.
Right. It really challenges the stereotype. Now, this study used a specific oral THC product, so further research is definitely needed to understand the long-term effects and how things vary from person to person. But it definitely suggests that THC's impact on sleep is a lot more nuanced than we often think.
Okay, fascinating. Now, I'm ready to dive into CBD a bit. It doesn't have those psychoactive effects like THC, but I've heard it can still be helpful for sleep. How does that work?
So unlike THC, CBD doesn't directly bind to those CB1 receptors we talked about earlier. Instead, it works indirectly, influencing other pathways that impact anxiety and relaxation. There's a 2022 study by Batala and others, and it suggests that CBD might actually boost the levels of our naturally produced anandamide.
So CBD is like the supportive friend, giving our body's own relaxation crew a boost to tackle those anxious thoughts that keep us up at night. I like that analogy.
Exactly. It's all about understanding these subtle interactions. Now, when we look at the actual research on cannabis and sleep, we do see some intriguing findings. But things can get a bit.
Well, controversial.
Oh, I love a good controversy. Hit me with it. What does the research actually say about cannabis and sleep?
Well, some studies suggest that cannabis, particularly THC, can help people fall asleep faster. But here's the catch. It might actually mess with your sleep quality later in the night. And then there's the whole issue of tolerance, which was highlighted in a 2017 review by Babson, Sottle, and Marasco. Basically, over time, you might need higher and higher doses to get those same sleep-inducing effects, so you could end up needing more and more just to fall asleep, and then your sleep quality might suffer. That doesn't sound like a sustainable sleep solution to me.
That's a key concern, especially for long-term use. And when we look at specific sleep disorders, like insomnia, the research gets even more complex. A 2022 study by Black and others found that while cannabis might temporarily alleviate insomnia symptoms, there's just not enough evidence to say it's a reliable long-term treatment.
So if someone is struggling with insomnia, cannabis might not be the answer. I feel like that's going to be disappointing news for a lot of people.
It's a tough reality, but it's important to be honest about the limitations of the current research. Cannabis might offer some temporary relief for some people, but it's not a cure-all for insomnia. We need more rigorous studies, and those studies need to clearly differentiate between getting to sleep and staying asleep, which are two very different challenges.
You're right, staying asleep is a whole other beast. You can fall asleep easily, but if you're waking up multiple times throughout the night, you're not getting quality rest. Does cannabis have any impact on that aspect of sleep?
That's where things get really murky. Some people say cannabis helps them stay asleep, while others report more fragmented sleep. The research is still trying to catch up to those real-world experiences. And of course, the type of cannabis used, the dose, even the individual's unique physiology, all of that plays a role.
So it sounds like we're still in the early stages of unraveling the complex relationship between cannabis and sleep.
We are. And that's precisely why we need to approach this with a healthy mix of curiosity and caution.
Hmm.
There's potential here, but we need to be informed and responsible in how we explore it. It really is a complex landscape, and we're only just starting to understand it. And that's where personal experiences come in. Those anecdotal stories people share can provide really valuable insights that complement the scientific research.
Right, like that stack of stories you sent me talking about how different cannabis products affected your sleep. Some of those were pretty wild. One thing that really stood out was how people described different effects depending on whether they smoked or vaped or used edibles.
Ah, yes, the consumption method conundrum. It's a huge factor that's often overlooked in those generalized cannabis and sleep conversations. The way you consume cannabis drastically impacts how quickly it enters your system and how long those effects last.
So let's break that down. I'm picturing myself like Goldilocks here, trying to find the just right method for sleep. Walk me through the options. What are we working with here?
Okay, so let's say you're looking for fast-acting relief to fall asleep. In that case, inhaling methods like smoking or vaping might be the way to go. They deliver those sleep-inducing compounds directly to your lungs, which means they enter your bloodstream quickly and reach the brain pretty fast.
Makes sense. If you're tossing and turning, you probably don't want to wait hours for something to kick in.
Exactly, but here's the trade-off. The effects of inhalation tend to wear off faster compared to, say, edibles. So while they might help you drift off initially, they might not be the best option for staying asleep throughout the night.
Ah, okay, so if staying asleep is the bigger challenge, edibles might be a better bet.
They could be. Edibles take longer to work because they have to be digested and processed by the liver. But once those cannabinoids hit your system, the effects tend to last much longer, which could potentially help you stay asleep for a larger chunk of the night.
Okay, I'm starting to see the strategy here. But edibles are notorious for those unpredictable effects. You eat a brownie and then, bam! Hours later, you're on a cosmic journey when all you wanted was some shut-eye.
That's one of the biggest challenges with edibles, finding the right dose and understanding how your body will react. It's definitely a slow and steady game. Start with a low dose and gradually increase it until you find what works for you.
Right, the classic start low and go slow advice. I'm seeing that pop up a lot in these articles. But what about those folks who swear by a specific strain for sleep? Do different cannabis strains actually have different effects on sleep?
Ah, the strain debate. It's one of the most hotly contested topics in the cannabis world. Scientifically speaking, we're just starting to understand how different combinations of cannabinoids and terpenes, those aromatic compounds in cannabis, might affect sleep.
Terpenes. Those are the things that make different strains smell like pine trees or citrus fruits, right? I always thought those were just about the aroma.
They definitely contribute to the sensory experience, but terpenes also interact with the endocannabinoid system and can modulate the effects of those cannabinoids. For example, mycene, a terpene found in many indica strains, is often associated with relaxing and sedative effects.
So it's like each cannabis strain has its own unique cocktail of compounds that could either amplify or mellow out those sleep-inducing effects.
Exactly, and that's why some people might find a specific strain works wonders for their sleep, while another leaves them feeling wired or anxious. But here's the thing. We need more research to confirm these anecdotal observations and to understand how those individual variations come into play.
Right. It all comes back to that personalized approach. What works for one person might not work for another. Okay, so we've got consumption methods, strains, and individual variations to consider. Anything else we need to be mindful of when exploring cannabis for sleep?
Well, let's not forget about the potential downsides. While cannabis might offer temporary relief for some, it's not without its risks.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the potential for dependence.
That's a valid concern, especially with the increasing potency of cannabis products these days. While not everyone who uses cannabis becomes dependent, there's definitely potential for it. And those withdrawal symptoms, well, they can disrupt sleep even further. Think irritability, anxiety, and ironically, difficulty sleeping.
Oh, that's a cruel twist. You try to fix your sleep with cannabis, then end up with even worse insomnia if you try to stop.
It's a potential catch-22, and it highlights how important it is to use cannabis responsibly. Start with low doses, use it only when needed, and be upfront with your healthcare provider about your consumption habits.
Right? Honesty and moderation are key. But what about those folks who already struggle with anxiety? I've heard mixed reviews about whether cannabis helps or hurts anxiety-induced sleep problems.
That's a tough one. It really depends on the individual, the specific strain, and the dose. Some people find that cannabis helps them relax and unwind, making it easier to fall asleep. Others experience heightened anxiety or paranoia, especially with those high THC strains.
Well, it's like walking a tightrope. You've got to find that sweet spot where cannabis chills you out without tipping you over into anxiety land.
Precisely. And if you're prone to anxiety, it's especially important to start low, go slow, and choose strains known for their calming effects. And of course, those conversations with your healthcare provider are crucial. They can help you navigate those potential risks and benefits.
Okay, so we've got dependence, anxiety.
Mhm.
What else? What about those infamous weed hangovers? Can using cannabis before bed mess with your alertness the next day?
That's another valid concern, and unfortunately, the answer isn't a simple yes or no. Some people wake up feeling groggy or mentally sluggish after using cannabis, especially if they've consumed high doses or strains that are high in THC. Others report no lingering effects at all.
So it's like a gamble. You might wake up feeling refreshed, or you might feel like you're slogging through mud all day.
Yeah.
Not exactly enticing.
It's a gamble for sure. But here's where things get interesting. A 2024 study by Russo and others found that a specific medicinal cannabis oil containing both THC and CBD actually improved sleep quality in adults with insomnia without causing any noticeable next-day impairment.
Hold on. So they were taking THC before bed and still felt fine the next day. How is that possible?
It's all about the formulation. This specific oil had a balanced ratio of THC and CBD, and it was administered in a controlled setting. It seems like that CBD might actually mitigate some of those negative cognitive effects that are often associated with THC.
So CBD is like the responsible friend making sure THC doesn't get too out of control. I love it. But I'm guessing this doesn't mean we can just go popping any THC CBD product and expect to wake up feeling bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, right?
Exactly. It's not a free pass to overindulge. This study highlights the potential of specific formulations, but we need more research to confirm these findings and to understand how different ratios and doses affect next-day alertness.
Right, so we still need to be mindful of that potential grogginess, especially if we're driving or operating heavy machinery.
Absolutely. Safety first. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that often gets lost in the cannabis hype, the importance of good sleep hygiene.
Yes. Let's not forget the fundamentals. You can experiment with all the cannabis products in the world, but if you're not practicing good sleep hygiene, you're fighting an uphill battle.
Couldn't agree more. It's like building a house on a shaky foundation. You might be able to prop it up for a while, but eventually it's going to crumble.
Okay, so let's lay down that solid foundation. What are some of those essential sleep hygiene practices everyone should be following, whether they use cannabis or not?
The basics are simple, but they're really powerful. Start with a consistent sleep schedule. Go to bed and wake up around the same time each day, even on weekends. This helps regulate your circadian rhythm and sets your body up for optimal sleep.
So no more late-night Netflix binges or sleeping until noon on Sundays. My inner night owl is not going to be happy about this.
Consistency is key. Even if you're not feeling tired at your designated bedtime, create a relaxing bedtime routine to signal to your body that it's time to wind down. Think a warm bath, reading a book, listening to some calming music. Anything that helps you de-stress and disconnect from the day.
Okay, that sounds doable. No screens in bed, dim the lights, maybe some lavender essential oil. I'm starting to feel relaxed just thinking about it.
Exactly. And don't forget the power of your sleep environment. Your bedroom should be cool, dark, and quiet, a true sanctuary for sleep. Invest in blackout curtains, earplugs, or a white noise machine if needed to minimize those distractions and create that optimal sleep haven.
Right, transform your bedroom into a sleep fortress. Out with the clutter, in with the cozy blankets and sleep masks. But what about those people who've tried all those sleep hygiene tricks and are still struggling? Is there anything beyond cannabis that can help?
Absolutely. There's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, which is a really effective non-drug approach. It helps you identify and change thoughts and behaviors that might be interfering with your sleep.
So it's like retraining your brain to sleep better. I've heard good things about CBTI, but does it actually work?
It has a strong track record. A 2018 article by Abbott and others discussed its effectiveness, especially for young people. It helps address the underlying causes of insomnia rather than just masking the symptoms.
So it's not just about quick fixes. It's about getting to the root of the sleep problem. I like that. But what about those times when you just need a little extra help to doze off? Is there a place for over-the-counter sleep aids?
They can be helpful for short-term use, but it's important to use them cautiously and under the guidance of your healthcare provider. Some common over-the-counter options include antihistamines, like diphenhydramine, which can make you drowsy, but they can also have side effects, things like dry mouth and next-day grogginess.
Not exactly a perfect solution, and I'm guessing mixing those over-the-counter sleep aids with cannabis is a big no-no, right?
Definitely a recipe for disaster.
Mm.
Combining those substances can really amplify the sedative effects and lead to unpredictable and potentially dangerous outcomes. Always talk to your doctor before mixing any medications or supplements with cannabis.
Got it. Safety first, always. Now, before we wrap up this segment, I want to touch on something I think is really important, the emotional and psychological aspects of sleep.
Absolutely. We often get so caught up in the physical mechanics of sleep that we forget about all that emotional and mental baggage we carry into bed with us.
Right, like those racing thoughts, worries, and to-do lists that just keep us tossing and turning all night long.
Exactly. And this is where practices like mindfulness, meditation, or even just journaling before bed can be incredibly helpful. They give you a chance to process those emotions, calm the mental chatter, and create a sense of inner peace that's much more conducive to sleep.
So it's not just about shutting off the lights, it's about shutting off those mental chatterboxes in our heads.
Precisely. And sometimes getting professional help from a therapist or counselor can be incredibly valuable in addressing those deeper emotional issues that might be interfering with sleep.
Right, because sometimes insomnia is a symptom of something bigger going on. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From the science of sleep and the endocannabinoid system to the pros and cons of cannabis, the importance of good sleep hygiene, and the power of addressing our emotional well-being. It's clear that achieving restful sleep really requires that holistic approach.
Couldn't agree more. It's not just about finding the right sleep aid. It's about cultivating a lifestyle that supports healthy sleep habits. It's about nurturing our minds, bodies, and spirits to create the conditions for restful nights and vibrant days.
Beautifully said. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to explore those options, be mindful of the risks, and find what works best for you on your unique sleep journey. It really is a journey, isn't it? Figuring out what works for you and your sleep. And speaking of those personalized approaches, I'm curious to get your take on the future of cannabis and sleep. Where do you see this field heading?
Well, I think we're on the verge of some pretty major breakthroughs. One area I'm particularly excited about is the development of cannabis products that are specifically tailored for sleep. Right now, the market can feel a bit like the Wild West. There are so many different strains and formulations out there, it can be pretty overwhelming to navigate.
It's like walking into a giant dispensary and just randomly grabbing stuff off the shelves, hoping for the best.
Exactly. But as research progresses and regulations evolve, I predict we'll see a shift towards more standardized products with clear labeling, consistent dosing, and formulations that are targeted for specific sleep needs. Imagine a product that's designed to help you fall asleep faster, or one that promotes deeper, more restorative sleep.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. Tailor-made cannabis for a perfect night's sleep. Sign me up.
Yeah.
But what about those people who are a bit hesitant to try cannabis for whatever reason? Are there any alternative therapies on the horizon that might offer similar benefits without those psychoactive effects?
Absolutely. The world of sleep science is constantly evolving, and researchers are exploring all sorts of non-cannabis approaches. We've got New medications, biofeedback techniques, even light therapy devices that can help regulate our circadian rhythms.
So even if cannabis isn't your thing, there's still hope for a good night's sleep. Speaking of hope, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the role of cannabis in managing chronic pain, anxiety, and depression. These are conditions that often go hand in hand with sleep problems, so what's the latest on that front?
Well, there's a growing body of research suggesting that cannabis, particularly CBD, might actually have some therapeutic potential in these areas. CBD has anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective properties, which could help alleviate pain, reduce anxiety, and even improve mood. And by addressing those underlying issues, it could indirectly lead to better sleep.
So it's not just about knocking you out, it's about tackling those root causes of sleeplessness, right? But I'm also wondering about the flip side of that. What about the potential risks? Could using cannabis to manage these conditions lead to other problems down the line?
That's a really important question, and it really underscores the need for long-term studies to fully understand both the potential benefits and risks of cannabis use, especially for these types of conditions. We need to know if those benefits truly outweigh the risks, particularly when it comes to chronic use.
Right. It's about finding that balance, weighing the potential benefits against those potential downsides. And I'm guessing those risks might vary depending on the individual, right? Like someone with a history of addiction might be more susceptible to developing a dependence on cannabis.
Exactly. Individual factors play a huge role, and that's why those open and honest conversations with your healthcare provider are so incredibly important. They can help you assess those risks, personalize your treatment plan, and monitor you for any potential problems that might arise.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive into the world of cannabis and sleep, let's recap some of those key takeaways for our listeners. First and foremost, cannabis is not some magical cure-all for sleep problems. It might be helpful for some people, but it's not a guaranteed solution for everyone.
Absolutely, and it's so important to remember that cannabis can have both positive and negative effects on sleep. The type of cannabis you're using, the dose, how you're consuming it, and all those individual factors, it all comes into play.
Right, it's like this big, complex puzzle with all these different pieces that need to fit together just right. So experimentation can be key, but always proceed with caution and definitely consult with your healthcare professional.
Couldn't agree more. And let's not forget about the power of good sleep hygiene. Those basic practices, things like maintaining a consistent sleep schedule, creating a relaxing bedtime routine, and optimizing your sleep environment, those can make a huge difference in your sleep quality, regardless of whether you use cannabis or not.
Absolutely. It's all about building that solid foundation for sleep. And finally, remember that sleep is influenced by so many factors, our physical health, our emotional state, even our mental well-being. So if you're dealing with those chronic sleep problems, don't give up. Explore all of your options, address those underlying issues, and advocate for your right to restful nights.
Well said. The quest for a good night's sleep is a journey, and it's one we're all on together.
Absolutely. So to all of our listeners out there, keep experimenting, keep learning, and most importantly, keep those sleep dreams alive. Sweet dreams, everyone.
Sleep well.